when two homeless twins approached Shaquille O'Neal desperately. He had no idea of the truth behind those two little girls, but when he heard their confession, he broke down in tears, moved beyond words. Stay until the end. To discover what happened, you don't want to miss this incredible story. Subscribe and comment where you're watching from today. The early morning sun filtered through a pale veil of clouds, casting long, silver beams across the wide concrete steps of St. Jude Memorial Hospital. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly, their cold hue a stark contrast to the gentle warmth of the sun outside. The scent of antiseptic and quiet urgency filled the air. But in one small room, room 214, a different kind of presence was felt. Shaquille O'Neal sat in a chair that looked far too small for his 7 feet 1 inch frame, his massive arms stretched out calmly, while a young nurse carefully monitored the blood donation process. His towering figure dwarfed the chair, but there was no discomfort in his demeanor, only quiet focus. Shaq's dark eyes were fixed on the window where the rising sun danced off the glass, a rare look of solemn reflection on his face. "You doing okay, Mr. O'Neal?" the nurse asked, her voice gentle but tired, betraying the early hour. Shaq glanced at her, then gave a small smile, the kind that reached his eyes but carried a weight behind it. "Yeah, I'm good. It's peaceful in here, you know? Sometimes you forget how rare that is." The nurse nodded, adjusting the IV line gently. "That's true. It's rare to see someone like you here during National Blood Donor Awareness Month. Most people just send a tweet or a donation." Shaq chuckled, a low, warm sound that rumbled in his chest. "Well, tweets don't save lives. Blood does. My mama always told me, if God gave you something big, use it for something good." The nurse smiled, clearly touched. She tightened the clamp and glanced at the steadily filling blood bag. "Almost done. You're saving lives today," Shaq nodded. "Then it's already a good day." There was a pause. The soft hum of machines and distant voices from down the hallway were the only sounds between them. For a moment, this giant of a man, usually surrounded by cameras, fans, or flashing lights, was just a man giving something simple and vital. The nurse removed the needle with practiced care, pressing a square of gauze to his thick arm and securing it with medical tape. "You did great." "I didn't faint. That's a win in my book," Shaq joked, slowly rising to his feet and rolling down his sleeve. The nurse laughed, shaking her head. "Don't forget to grab some juice and cookies before you go. Gotta keep that big engine running." Shaq tipped an imaginary hat with 2 fingers. "Yes, ma'am." As he walked out of the room, the calm bubble of the donation area burst. The hallway beyond was busier now, nurses moving with purpose, patients being wheeled to and fro, quiet conversations mixing with the occasional ringing phone. Shaq stood for a moment, feeling the rush of life returning all around him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Messages, a missed call from his agent, a calendar reminder about a potential appearance for a new show. He stared at it for a moment, then sighed. Not yet. He slipped the phone back in and headed for the exit. Outside, the day had fully broken. The sky glowed with a soft blue, and the morning air had that crisp, hopeful scent of something new. Shaq stepped down the hospital steps slowly, relishing the fresh air filling his lungs. That's when he saw them. 2 small figures stood across the street near a shadowed alleyway, partially hidden behind a crumbling brick wall. They couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. One of them clutched an old, worn-out bag close to her chest. Their clothes were thin and ragged, shoes barely clinging to their feet. But what struck Shaq the most, more than the clothes, more than their frailty, was their stillness. They weren't playing or laughing like children should. They were watching, waiting. Shaq's instincts kicked in. He waited for the crosswalk signal, his gaze fixed on them. When the light changed, he walked slowly across the street, his size and presence commanding attention without him trying. The girls didn't move. If anything, they stiffened. He stopped several feet away, lowering himself into a crouch so he wouldn't tower over them. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice deep but kind. "You two okay?" The older-looking twin stepped forward slightly. Her voice was so thin, it nearly got swallowed by the city noise. "Sir, please, do you have anything? Money? Food?" Shaq reached into his pocket without hesitation. He pulled out a folded $20 bill and handed it to the girl. "Get yourself something warm, okay?" The younger girl snatched it with shaking hands, clutching it tight, like it was life itself. Her eyes met his. And in them, Shaq saw something that hit him like a punch to the chest. Hunger, fear, hope. He hesitated, noticing the bag the younger twin was carrying. There was a smell, one he couldn't quite place, but it wasn't good. It was medical, almost putrid. Before he could ask about it, a sharp voice rang out from the alley. "Girls, what did I tell you? Get back here!" The girls flinched violently. The older one grabbed her sister's hand, and they disappeared like startled animals into the dark alley. Shaq turned toward the voice. A hunched woman stood deeper in the alley, partially cloaked in shadow. Her eyes darted nervously before she vanished behind a wall of tattered blankets. He stood motionless on the sidewalk, stunned, his hands clenched and unclenched. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the realization that what he'd just seen wasn't a moment. It was a glimpse into another world, a world no child should belong to. For several moments, Shaq didn't move. He just stood there, staring into the mouth of the alley. Then, quietly, he made a decision. He couldn't walk away. He turned on his heel and entered the nearby convenience store, grabbing a bottle of juice and a hot dog. The cashier barely looked up. Shaq paid in silence and returned outside, positioning himself on a bench across from the alley. He placed the hot dog and juice beside him and waited. Minutes passed, 10, then 20. People moved around him oblivious. A businessman shouting into his phone, a woman walking her dog, a young couple arguing about coffee orders. Life carried on. Then, movement. The twins reappeared at the mouth of the alley. Shaq's heart lifted slightly. He grabbed the food and stood, slowly, crossing the street. The girls spotted him again, pausing mid-step. This time, he saw something in their faces, recognition and confusion. Why was he still here? "I said I'd get you something warm," he said softly, offering the hot dog and juice. "Didn't forget." The younger girl's eyes lit up. She reached for the food, then paused, glancing at her sister. "It's okay," the older twin said quietly. "He's nice." They sat together on a stoop just outside the alley, Shaq towering like a mountain beside them. The girls ate slowly at first, savoring each bite. "My name's Shaq," he said finally. "What are your names?" The older one looked up. "I'm Rose. This is my sister, Rena." "Beautiful names," Shaq said, smiling. "You two live back there?" Rose nodded. "With our mom." Shaq glanced toward the alley. "Is she okay?" "She's sick," Rose said. "Like Rena, they both wear the bags." Shaq's eyes flicked to the satchel Rena carried. It clicked. A colostomy bag, medical, chronic, expensive. Rena drank the juice in greedy gulps. "This is so good," she whispered. "You shouldn't be drinking from garbage cans," Shaq said softly. "We do sometimes," Rose admitted, voice trembling. "It's better than nothing." Shaq swallowed hard. "I want to help you," he said finally, "but I need to understand more." Rose's eyes darted nervously toward the alley. "If we take you to her, we have to be careful," Shaq nodded. "Careful is my middle name," Uncle Teddy might be awake, Rena whispered. Who's Uncle Teddy? The girls fell silent for a moment. He watches the tents, but he's not nice, Rose said. He takes stuff, searches people. Right now, Rena added, he's probably still asleep. Shaq took a deep breath. This wasn't a movie. There were no security guards, no scripts, no heroes. But there were these two girls, and now he was in their story. Then, let's go, he said. You lead. I'll follow. As they rose and walked toward the alley, Shaq adjusted his hoodie and sunglasses, his heart pounding. Not from fear, but from knowing he was exactly where he needed to be. Shaquille O'Neal's footsteps were impossibly quiet for a man of his size. Each step he took deeper into the alley felt like crossing a boundary, from the world of fame and comfort into a domain of shadows, survival, and stories untold. Behind him, the busy city buzzed in daylight. Ahead, a chilling silence blanketed the narrow, winding passage between tents and cardboard shelters, broken only by the rustling of wind and the occasional creak of shifting debris. The twins, Rose and Rena, moved with the practiced grace of children who had long been forced to live like ghosts. They glanced back at Shaq every few steps, making sure he was still following and staying quiet. He gave a soft nod each time. His massive frame somehow shrunk by the weight of what he was walking into. The closer they came to the heart of the encampment, the more Shaq could feel it. This place had rules, unspoken, unwritten, but deeply enforced. The smell of mold, rot, and desperation filled his nose. Tarps rustled softly overhead. Shadows twitched. Eyes peeked from corners. Every inch of the place told a story that had never made the news, and probably never would. This way, Rose whispered, pointing to a narrow passage between two leaning tents. Shaq had to duck low, practically crouching to follow. He grimaced at the sight of jagged metal poking from the side of a broken shopping cart and kept one large hand hovering above Rena's shoulder. Protective, but gentle, as if afraid the girl might vanish at the first wrong move. They paused suddenly. Just a few feet ahead, a loud snore shook the silence. "That's Uncle Teddy," Rose whispered, her breath barely more than air. "Don't wake him." Shaq stiffened. The tent next to them bulged outward, patched with duct tape and old military canvas. From inside came the unmistakable groan of a man lost in deep, possibly drunken sleep. Empty liquor bottles littered the entrance. A faded duffel bag sat nearby, split open, with trinkets and half-eaten food spilling out. Rena shivered, clutching the bottle of juice Shaq had given her, like it was sacred. Shaq crouched low, placing a finger to his lips. "I got you," he whispered. The girls led him around the tent, tiptoeing on flattened cardboard and rickety wood planks. Shaq followed, every careful step reminding him just how fragile the ground beneath their lives really was. After a final turn, past a torn-up mattress and a rusted bike frame, they stopped. "That's ours," Rose said quietly. Before them stood a small, carefully arranged lean-to. 3 tarps held up by a lattice of broom handles, old curtain rods, and bits of metal. It wasn't a home. Not in any traditional sense, but the girls looked at it with reverence. Shaq knelt. Inside, curled up on a pile of worn blankets and coats, was a woman. Her face was pale, lined with illness and exhaustion. Her eyes, though closed, were sunken deep and her cheeks hollowed. Tubing protruded from her side, connected to a bulging medical bag nearly full. She was sleeping, but not peacefully. Her breaths were shallow, irregular. A small bottle of pills sat beside her, half empty. "She's been out since last night," Rose murmured. "She hasn't eaten today." Shaq's chest ached. All the awards, the championships, the endorsement deals. None of that felt even remotely real in this moment. He felt like a child again, remembering the nights when his family struggled to pay bills, when the fridge was nearly empty, when he'd pretend he wasn't hungry so someone else could eat. But this was different. This wasn't just poverty. This was life on the razor's edge, where one missing prescription or one extra cold night could change everything. Rose sat cross-legged next to her mother and reached out to gently touch her arm. "Mama, someone's here to help." The woman stirred. Her eyelids fluttered. She blinked, confused, trying to focus on the shadowy figure beyond her daughters. Shaq removed his sunglasses slowly. The woman's breath caught. "Shaq. Shaquille O'Neal," she rasped, her voice little more than a whisper. Shaq smiled gently. "Yeah, ma'am, but just call me Shaq. Your daughters found me outside the hospital. They told me a bit about your situation." The woman tried to sit up but winced immediately. Rose rushed to support her. Shaq crawled forward and offered his hand. Her fingers were cold, paper thin. He didn't squeeze, just held her hand with reverence. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said softly, "but I couldn't walk away." Tears welled in her eyes. "No one ever stays. People give money, food sometimes, but no one stays." "I'm here now," Shaq replied. "I just want to help." She swallowed with difficulty. "My name is Alana. I have Crohn's. So does Rena. No insurance. No address. The hospital gives us what they can under the table, but it's not enough," Shaq nodded. "I figured it had to be something serious. The girl said you needed help." Ilana looked at her daughters, then back at him. "I need a chance. Not just money, a way out. I used to work at a clinic. I was a nursing assistant. Before I got sick. Before we lost our apartment." Shaq sat back on his heels, absorbing her words. "Let me ask you something," he said carefully. "If I could get you into a real hospital, get you proper care, a clean place to stay, would you go?" Alana didn't hesitate. "Yes, but only if they take the girls. I won't leave them behind." "You won't have to," Shaq said, "but I need you to trust me." Alana smiled weakly. "You already stayed. That's more than anyone's done." Shaq stood slowly, glancing at Rose and Rena. "I'm going to make a call," he said. "Stay here. Keep her warm." The girls nodded solemnly. Shaq stepped outside, ducking beneath a drooping tarp and moving away from the tent. Once he was sure he had a signal, he pulled out his phone. His hands trembled slightly as he tapped the screen. "Hey," he said when someone answered. "Yeah, it's Shaq. Listen, I need a favor, a big one." He explained quickly, voice low. He gave the address of the alley, the condition of the mother, and the needs of the children. "You'll do it," he said after a long pause. "You'll send someone?" Shaq closed his eyes in relief. "Thank you," he breathed. "And tell them to bring everything. This family's coming home." He hung up and stared down the alley. It was no longer just a collection of tents and garbage. It was a battlefield, and he was in it now. When he returned, Rose looked up at him with wide eyes. "Did they say yes?" she asked. "They did," Shaq replied. "Help's coming, real help. We just need to wait here a little longer." A strange silence settled over them then, not the kind born of fear or despair, but of something closer to hope. Shaq sat beside the twins, one arm around each of them. The weight of the world hadn't disappeared, but it felt, for a moment, like they didn't have to carry it alone. Behind him, Ilana had fallen back asleep, her breathing steadier now. And somewhere beyond the alley, sirens were beginning to rise. Not in alarm, but as a promise. Help was on the way. The first sound they heard wasn't a siren. It was the crunch of tires on gravel, soft, careful, deliberate. Shaq's ears perked up immediately. He stood, towering over the girls, his wide shoulders tensed like a fortress. A black SUV slowly inched its way into the narrow entrance of the alley, its headlights low. A moment later, a white, unmarked van followed, crawling behind it like a ghost, unsure it belonged in this world. Inside the lean-to, Ilana stirred, blinking slowly at the filtered daylight creeping in. Rose looked up at Shaq. "Is it them?" Shaq nodded. "Yeah, it's them." He stepped forward, raising his hand. The doors of the SUV opened almost simultaneously. Out stepped two individuals. One, a middle-aged black woman in scrubs and a long coat, her expression sharp but kind. The other, a younger man in a paramedic's uniform, already reaching into the van for a medical kit. The woman spotted Shaq first and exhaled in disbelief. "Shaquille O'Neal," she said, eyes wide. "You weren't kidding." "No, ma'am," he said, "this is real." She approached and lowered her voice. "I'm Dr. Lillian Hart, head of urban outreach with St. Mercy Medical. You said 3 patients?" Shaq nodded. "The mother's name is Elena. Advanced Crohn's, untreated. The little one, Rena, same condition. The older girl, Rose, seems fine physically, but I can tell she's been holding everything together on sheer will." Dr. Hart pressed her lips together and nodded. "We'll take it from here." The moment the medical team stepped into the heart of the alley, something shifted. It was subtle at first. A movement behind one of the tarps, a head poking from a tent, the shuffle of feet on gravel. Whispers spread like fire in dry grass. "Cops?" "Number medics." "What's he doing here?" "That's Shaq, the Shaq dot." And then a louder voice, angry and sharp. "We didn't ask for charity." Shaq turned sharply. A man emerged from the shadows, wiry, sunburnt, eyes sunken deep into his skull, like they'd been swallowed by resentment. His clothes hung off him like they were borrowed from another life. His name was Clutch. Everyone in the alley seemed to know him. He stepped forward, hands shaking slightly, but voice full of venom. "You think you can just roll in here with cameras and kindness and fix this place?" he spat. "You got no idea how this works. You don't belong here." Shaq met his glare evenly. "I'm not here to fix everything. I'm here for one family," Clutch sneered. "That's how it starts. You take one, then the city comes. They sweep the rest of us out like trash. We've been surviving here for years. You come strolling in and what? We're supposed to thank you." Behind Clutch, others had begun to gather. Half curious, half cautious. Some looked scared, others looked tired, but a few, just a few, looked angry. Shaq kept his voice steady. "No one's getting swept. This isn't about politics. It's about a mother who's dying and 2 girls who deserve better." Clutch shook his head. "Every time someone offers hope, it comes with strings. They'll clean this alley out. You'll go back to your mansion and we'll be scattered like rats." Dr. Hart stepped forward. "No one's forcing anyone to leave." Clutch glared at her, then looked back at Shaq. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice trembling with something deeper than rage, something like heartbreak. "You don't live here. You don't feel the cold nights. You don't fight rats for food. You don't watch people disappear and pretend it didn't happen so you can sleep." Shaq took a step forward. "I don't live here," he said. "You're right. But I remember sleeping on floors. I remember nights when the fridge was empty and I acted like I wasn't hungry so someone else could eat. I remember my mama crying in the dark because the lights got cut again. I remember." Clutch's face twitched. Shaq took another step. "But I also remember the man who stayed." That got Clutch's attention. "Mr. Wilson," Shaq said, eyes glassy. "My high school coach. When I wanted to quit, he stayed. When I had no sneakers, he gave me his. When I broke down crying, he didn't tell me to toughen up. He let me cry, and then he helped me stand again." The alley was silent now. "You want to hate me? Fine," Shaq said. "But I'm not leaving this family behind. Not these girls. Not their mama. You call that charity. I call it responsibility." For a moment, Clutch just stared at him. Then, slowly, he backed away. He didn't say another word. Shaq turned back toward the lean-to. Dr. Hart and the paramedics were already at work. One of them was taking Alana's vitals. The other gently examined Rena's abdomen while Rose sat nearby, clutching her mother's hand. Alana looked at Shaq, her eyes rimmed with tears. "Is it really happening?" she whispered. "It's happening," he said, kneeling beside her. "We're getting you all out of here." Dr. Hart gently injected a sedative into Alana's IV. "We're prepping her for transport. We'll be careful." As they carefully lifted Alana onto the stretcher, the entire alley watched. Some eyes were suspicious. Some were hopeful. Some just looked lost. As the paramedics loaded Alana into the ambulance, Rena hesitated. Shaq reached for her hand. "You're coming too," he said. "You and your sister." "But what about our stuff?" Rose asked, voice small. Shaq stood, towering over them. "We'll get it later. Right now, I just want you safe." A tear slid down Rose's cheek. "You came back," she whispered. Shaq smiled. "I told you I would." The back of the ambulance opened and Dr. Hart motioned the girls in. Rena climbed first, then Rose. Just before the doors closed, Rose looked at Shaq one more time. "Will you come?" she asked. Shaq nodded. "Right behind you." The door shut and the ambulance rolled forward. Shaq stood there, still as a statue, until the red lights disappeared. He turned to Dr. Hart's assistant. "You got room in that SUV?" "Yeah," he said. "You riding with us?" "No," Shaq said, scanning the alley one last time. "I'll meet you there. I got one more thing to do." The man nodded and climbed into the vehicle. Shaq turned back toward the alley. Clutch was gone. The crowd had dispersed. But something lingered in the air. Not anger. Not fear. Possibility. Shaq stepped toward the shadows. He walked past the lean-to, past Uncle Teddy's tent, past the broken carts and piles of forgotten things. At the edge of the alley, he found an old woman sitting on an overturned crate. She looked up at him, eyes cloudy, but not unkind. "You did a good thing," she said softly. "I just started," he replied. She smiled. He walked past her and into the fading afternoon light. The alley, for now, was behind him. But the story had just begun. The hum of fluorescent lights was sharp and unrelenting. Shaquille O'Neal sat silently in the private waiting room at St. Mercy Medical, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, eyes on the scuffed tile floor. His 6'11" frame made even the hospital chair look like it belonged to a child. He didn't move much, but inside he was spinning. Through the double doors just 20 feet away, Dr. Hart and her team worked on Alana. Down the hall, Rose and Rena were undergoing pediatric testing in a small observation suite with social workers and a nurse practitioner. It had only been a few hours since they were pulled from the alley, but everything had changed, except one thing: the weight in Shaq's chest. That hadn't budged. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. Shaq looked up. It was Dr. Hart. Her eyes were tired but sharp. "She's stable," she said, entering. "But she's very, very sick, malnourished, advanced infection. She's been in pain for years." Shaq stood. "Is she gonna make it?" Dr. Hart hesitated. "We're buying her time. That's all I can promise right now. But I will say this. If you hadn't brought her in today, she wouldn't have survived the week." Shaq exhaled and ran a hand over his head. "And the girls?" Dr. Hart's face softened. "They're okay. Frail but strong. Especially Rose. She's been taking care of everything. Honestly, that kid is the only reason her family didn't fall apart a year ago." Shaq nodded, jaw tight. "She reminds me of someone I knew." "Who?" He looked down at his massive hands, remembering tiny sneakers with duct tape, late-night ramen dinners, the sound of his mom crying softly through the wall. "My mother," he said. There was a long pause. Then, Dr. Hart smiled gently. "You've done something extraordinary," Mr. O'Neill. Shaq shook his head. "Not yet." A nurse peeked in through the door. "Rose is asking for him," she said softly. "She won't eat until she sees him." Shaq followed her down the corridor, each step echoing in the quiet hospital wing. When they reached the pediatric room, he took a breath before walking in. Inside, Rena was lying on the bed, IV in her arm, eyes closed but peaceful. A teddy bear had been placed gently on her chest. Rose sat beside her, feet swinging off the edge of the bed, arms crossed like a little soldier holding the line. When she saw Shaq, her face broke, but not into a smile, into tears. She stood up and ran to him, crashing into his waist like a wave. "I didn't think we'd make it," she said, her voice muffled in his hoodie. Shaq lowered himself to one knee and wrapped his arms around her. She was tiny, so much smaller than she tried to appear. "You did make it," he said. "You saved your sister. You saved your mom." Rose sniffled. "You did." He pulled back gently and looked into her eyes. "No, Rose. You did the heavy lifting. I just got you across the finish line." Her lip trembled. "Is she gonna die?" Shaq looked her in the eye. "We're not letting that happen," he said. "Not on my watch." They sat together for a while. Shaq, Rose, and little Rena, who stirred once or twice but never opened her eyes. Shaq told her stories, funny ones, about his first free-throw airball in college, about breaking a backboard and being so embarrassed he tried to pretend it was on purpose, about his mother, Lucille, and how her strength had carried him when he was sure he'd fall. Rose laughed, then cried again, then laughed some more, and then, out of nowhere, she asked, "Why us?" Shaq blinked. "Why'd you pick us?" she asked. "Out of everyone in that alley." He paused. Then he said something he hadn't said aloud in years. "Because I was you once," he whispered. Rose tilted her head. "I was the big kid who pretended everything was fine, who smiled so the people I loved wouldn't see how scared I was. I was the one carrying someone else's pain so they wouldn't have to." Rose stared. Shaq reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a small silver chain. A cross dangled at the end. Simple, old, well-worn. "This was my mom's," he said. "She gave it to me before my first NBA game. Told me, 'Don't forget where you came from and don't you ever pass someone drowning if you can pull them out.'" He placed it gently in her palm. "Now, I'm giving it to you." Rose didn't say anything, but her tiny fingers closed around it. That night, when the hospital grew quiet and Shaq finally stepped outside, the world felt heavy again. Not hopeless, just real. He made his way to the rooftop. Needed air. Needed sky. As he leaned over the railing and looked at the glowing city beneath him, he heard a voice behind him. "You're still a terrible free throw shooter." He turned. It was Coach Evans, gray hair now, lines in his face deeper than ever. But the same fire in his eyes, the same grounding presence that had anchored Shaq when he was 15 and nearly lost. "Coach," Shaq said, grinning. "What are you doing here?" "Heard what happened. Word gets around." They stood side by side for a while, looking over the city. "Can't believe it," Coach said. "You never were the rescue mission type. Always like to bulldoze through problems," Shaq chuckled. "Still do, just aim better now." Coach nodded. "You did good." Shaq's smile faded. "I don't know, Coach. I got them here, but Alana's hanging on by a thread. Those girls, they're gonna need years of healing, therapy, stability, love. I can't give them all that." Coach turned to him sharply. "No one's asking you to be Superman, son. They just needed someone to show up, and you did." Shaq was quiet. Then he looked at Coach and asked, "What if I do more?" "Like what?" Shaq's voice was low but firm. What if we build something, not a shelter, not a donation, a path? A system that starts where the cracks do in alleys. What if no one else falls through? Coach's eyebrows rose. You serious? Shaq nodded. This family won't be the last. Coach stared at him for a moment. Then, just like that day on the practice court in high school when he handed Shaq a pair of size 22 sneakers, he smiled. Then let's lace up. But outside the hospital, someone was watching. From across the street, in the shadow of a darkened phone booth, Clutch stood with his hood pulled up. His eyes tracked Shaq on the rooftop like a hunter watching prey. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands, the tip flaring red against the night. He wasn't done. Not yet. And the alley wasn't finished with Shaquille O'Neal. Not by a long shot. 2 weeks had passed since Shaquille O'Neal carried Elena and her daughters out of the alley. The girls were still in the hospital, slowly gaining strength. Rena had started walking short distances again, and Rose, despite her tiny frame, was already questioning doctors like she owned the place. Ilana? She'd made it through surgery. The infection hadn't taken her, but her recovery, it would be slow. Scars under her ribs and deeper ones in her spirit. Shaq visited every day. But outside those white hospital walls, something new was being born. A mission, a promise. Shaq had begun gathering people. Not celebrities, not politicians, soldiers, survivors, teachers, social workers who'd seen the alley from the inside. Quiet heroes who knew how to fix broken things without needing applause. And at the center of it all, Coach Evans, pacing like a drill sergeant with a clipboard full of plans. They called it the Passage, not a shelter, a system. A network of mobile trauma units, safe houses, alley response teams. They'd partner with hospitals, churches, barbershops, halfway houses. No red tape, no handouts, just hands. The idea? No child, no mother, no ghost from the alley gets left behind again. Shaq paid for the first phase himself, quietly. God didn't make me 7 feet 1 inch just for dunks, he told the team. He made me big so I could carry people. But big dreams come with big enemies. It started with whispers. A phone call from a building inspector. Shaq, your permit for the East Side safe house is stalled. Something about structural compliance? Then a call from their food distribution partner. Hey man, someone's threatening to pull our licenses if we work with the Passage. Said we're breaking health codes. Even Coach's eyes darkened when the third call came. The city council. Shaq, I got word, he said after slamming the phone. They're looking into your nonprofit status. Audit incoming, IRS. This ain't about the law. This is a message. Shaq leaned forward, calm but firm. Who's sending it? Coach hesitated. Then he slid a photo across the table. A man in a silk suit, gold chain, and dark shades. Sharp jaw, crooked smile. Clutch, Coach muttered. But now he goes by Marcus Sorrell, urban development consultant. Shaq's jaw tightened. Clutch. The man who'd nearly killed Alana. The man who'd laughed as Rose bled on the sidewalk. And now, he was legit. On paper, at least. Coach nodded grimly. He owns half the real estate around the alleys you're trying to clean up. If your team steps in, he loses control. Of people, of fear, of cash. Shaq leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp as broken glass. Then it's time he met me in daylight. The confrontation didn't take long. Shaq and Clutch stood face to face in an upscale downtown cafe, surrounded by glass, art, and silence. Shaq's shoulders dwarfed the chairs behind him. Clutch sat with one leg crossed, sipping imported espresso like this was chess and he had time. Funny, Clutch said, smirking. You used to crush people under the rim. Now you're rescuing junkies and runaways. You gone soft, big man? Shaq didn't blink. I didn't come to argue. Oh, I know. You came to warn me. Clutch leaned forward. Here's your answer. He flicked a silver lighter across the table. It skidded and stopped by Shaq's hand. A faded sticker on the side read, Alley of Shadows. You know how many kids I feed in those alleys, Clutch sneered. How many moms come to me when the system forgets them? You're late to this game. And if you think you're gonna gentrify my world with your NBA money and God complex, he stood up, voice lowering. Then you're stepping into a fight you don't understand. Shaq's voice dropped to a low thunder. I understand one thing. You hurt a child. You break a mother. You sell suffering. Then I don't care how clean your suit is. I'll burn your empire to the ground. He slid the lighter back. Clutch caught it midair, smiled coldly. You try, O'Neill, and you'll find out just how many people are on my payroll. That night, Shaq drove back to the hospital. The lights were dimmed. Rose had fallen asleep next to Rena. Elena, pale but alert, was sitting upright for the first time, staring out the window. She turned as he entered. I heard you met with him, she said. Shaq sat beside her. He's not hiding anymore. He's buying his way into power. Alana's eyes didn't blink. He'll come for you next. I know. They were quiet a long time. Then she asked something that stopped him cold. Why are you doing this, Shaq? He looked at her. I told you. Because I was you once. She shook her head. Number, not just that. You're risking everything. Why? What are you trying to fix? He hesitated, then finally said it. When I was 13, my mom worked 3 jobs. One night, she collapsed on the kitchen floor from exhaustion. I sat with her for 3 hours before she woke up. No phone, no car, just me and her in the dark. He swallowed. I made a promise that night that I'd become something so big, so loud, the world would have to listen. And when it did, I'd use that voice to make sure no kid ever had to sit in that darkness again. Elena watched him, tears in her eyes. You're keeping that promise. I'm trying. But as the night deepened, across town, in a warehouse bathed in shadows and neon light, Clutch was already plotting. Around him stood a dozen men. All right, he said, lighting a cigar. It's time we remind O'Neill what happens when you poke the alley too hard. He pulled out a manila folder and opened it. Inside were surveillance photos. Shaq, Rose, Rena, and Alana. Clutch tapped her picture. She doesn't make it to recovery. Not if I can help it. The morning after Shaq's confrontation with Clutch, the city felt heavier. The sky was gray, the wind sharp. Something in the air whispered, "They're coming!" Coach Evans burst into Shaq's office, with eyes like alarm bells. We've got a breach. Shaq looked up from the case files he'd been combing through all night. What kind? Coach tossed down a flash drive. One of our safe houses got torched. Nobody inside, thank God. But they knew our exact rotation schedule. Surveillance cameras. Gone. This was surgical. Shaq clenched his jaw. We've got a mole, Coach nodded, and it's someone close. They stared at each other. Silence swelled like thunderclouds. Betrayal wasn't just dangerous. It was personal. Every member of the passage had been handpicked. People with scars, people with second chances. But now, one of them was leaking to Clutch. Run background checks. Everyone, even you, Shaq said flatly. Already on it, Coach replied. But you need to know. Clutch is watching the hospital now. Alana, the girls, they're not safe. Shaq didn't hesitate. Move them, quietly, tonight. By 10 p.m., a nondescript white van pulled into the hospital's back-loading dock. Rena and Rose, now mobile, though still weak, were bundled in coats and blankets. Alana, still bruised, stitched, but stronger, refused the wheelchair and walked under her own power, flanked by 2 women from the passage who used to be nurses, and now moved like trained operatives. Shaq met them on the sidewalk. Where we headed? Alana asked. A place no one knows. Not even Coach. She raised an eyebrow. You don't trust your own. Shaq didn't answer. The safe house was an abandoned school 30 minutes outside the city, converted into a quiet refuge. High walls, reinforced doors, no obvious windows. No Wi-Fi, just warmth, food, and safety. For the first time in months, the girls slept soundly. Shaq stayed downstairs, staring at the chalkboard in the old classroom. Someone had written in big white letters, "Every child is a lesson. Someone must listen." He stared at it for a long time. But Clutch wasn't resting. At 2 a.m., in a parking garage downtown, a man handed Clutch a new folder. Inside, blueprints, entry logs, video stills. Clutch grinned. Well, he murmured. They thought they could hide her. He turned to a man standing in the shadows behind him. You sure this intel is good? The man stepped forward, hooded, nervous. Yes, sir. Clutch lit a cigar. You did good, son. You'll get your payout soon. Then he turned to his crew. Midnight tomorrow. We hit the school. The next evening, Coach was reviewing new rotation files when something odd caught his eye. An internal memo had been deleted and rewritten. He traced the change and narrowed it down to one terminal. Only one person had access at that time. He froze. No. Shaq got the call at 8:15 p.m. Coach's voice was shaking. It's Deshaun, Shaq blinked. Deshaun had been with the passage since day one. A former foster kid turned community leader, one of Shaq's first recruits. No way. He sent the safe house files to a third-party server. It's Clutch's backdoor channel. We have confirmation. Shaq stood still. His chest tightened, not with rage, with heartbreak. Why? Coach hesitated. Money, a house, his brother's debt cleared. Clutch bought him a future. Shaq closed his eyes. I need to talk to him, alone. By 9 p.m., Shaq stood in an empty gym where Deshaun used to run rec leagues. The younger man walked in, eyes down. He was tall, lean, but he looked small tonight. Shaq. Why? Shaq asked, voice low. Deshaun's lip quivered. You told me we were building a future, but you didn't see what Clutch offered me. It wasn't just money, it was security. For once, I wouldn't be the poor kid trying to save others. I'd be safe. You think Alana felt safe when her ribs cracked in that alley? Deshaun winced. Shaq stepped closer. I gave you my trust, Deshaun whispered. I didn't know he'd hurt them. Yes, you did, Shaq said. You just didn't care enough until now. Tears rolled down Deshaun's cheeks. I'm sorry, Shaq stared at him. Then prove it. At 11:30 p.m., Clutch's crew arrived at the school. 5 black SUVs, silencers, masks. They moved in silence, tactical, predators in the night. They reached the entry doors, locked, but the back gate, open. They slipped through one by one. They didn't see the sensors. They didn't hear the silent alarms. They didn't realize they weren't hunting. They were walking into a trap. Inside the old gym, Shaq stood waiting. Behind him, Coach, 4 former SWAT officers, and a dozen members of the passage. And next to Shaq, Deshaun, wired. When the first masked man came through the gym doors, Shaq stepped forward like a mountain in sneakers. I warned you, he said softly. The man raised his weapon. Too late. Spotlights flared, shields moved, the room erupted. But this wasn't a firefight, it was a capture. They took Clutch's men down clean, one by one. Precision, control, no bloodshed, just justice. By the time Clutch's lieutenant was zip-tied to a bleacher, his eyes were wide. Where's Clutch? Shaq asked. No answer. Shaq turned to Deshaun. The younger man nodded. I know where he'll be. Tomorrow, noon. The sky was copper by noon, thick with heat, and a strange electricity in the air, like the city was holding its breath. Shaq stood on the rooftop of an old textile factory downtown, staring out over the rail yards below. His fists were clenched, not in anger, but in readiness. Today wasn't about rage. It was about reckoning. Behind him, Coach Evans set down a duffel bag full of tactical gear. "You sure you want to do this without backup?" Shaq didn't look back. "If I bring a whole team, Clutch runs. This has to feel intimate. Just me and him." Coach exhaled. "You know it's a trap." "Yeah, and I'm tired of walking around it." Across the rail yard, in an abandoned cargo depot, Clutch waited with 4 armed men. He checked his watch. "He's coming alone?" a spotter confirmed through binoculars. "Yup, big man, just him," Clutch smirked. Dumb muscle, always thinking with his fists. But what Clutch didn't know was that Shaq had no intention of fighting fair today. As Shaq crossed the cracked pavement, memories hit like body blows. The twins' screams, Alana's broken ribs, the shaking voices of kids forced to grow up too fast. He wasn't just walking toward Clutch. He was walking toward every moment in his life when he was told, "You're too soft, you're not smart enough. Just play ball and shut up." He wasn't shutting up anymore. He entered the depot slowly. It was dark, the walls dripping with rust. Clutch sat on an old forklift, legs crossed like he was at a dinner party. Well, the gentle giant arrives," he purred. Shaq stopped 10 feet away. "You've got one chance," Shaq said. "You let the kids go. You disappear. No one gets hurt," Clutch laughed. "Brother, you are hurt. I broke your family, I bent your team. And I made your golden boy Deshaun my pawn. What are you gonna do? Dunk on me?" Shaq stepped closer. "I'm gonna end you." Suddenly, one of Clutch's men moved. Shaq was faster. He spun, grabbed a rusted pipe from a stack, and launched it like a javelin. It hit the man's arm. Gun dropped, bone cracked. In the same motion, Shaq tackled another guard and sent him flying into a wall. Chaos erupted. But Shaq wasn't fighting to kill. He was disabling, disarming, defending. In 30 seconds, 3 men were groaning on the floor. Clutch stood, shocked. "Still think I'm just muscle," Shaq growled. Clutch tried to run. Shaq gave chase. They tore through the depot, past rusted crates and old conveyor belts. Clutch fired a shot. It grazed Shaq's arm. He didn't stop. He barreled through a wall of crates, tackled Clutch to the ground, and pinned him with one hand. "You don't get to hide behind fear anymore," Clutch snarled, reaching for his belt. A knife. Shaq caught his wrist. And then, flash. A drone above the scene blinked red. Coach's voice crackled in Shaq's earpiece. "We got it. Whole confession. Whole fight. Cops on the way." Shaq tightened his grip. "You're done." By 12:46 p.m., Clutch was in cuffs. By 1:20, the mayor was holding a press conference. By 2:15, the media had a name for it: the redemption raid. But for Shaq, it wasn't about headlines. It was about the quiet. The quiet that came that night as he sat in the safe house, watching Rena and Rose draw pictures again. Watching Alana sip tea, finally without fear behind her eyes. Coach walked in and handed him a photo. It was of the original team, the passage, day 1. Deshaun, smiling. Coach, proud. Shaq in a hoodie too small for his frame, holding a folder labeled Hope Plan. "We did it," Coach said. Shaq looked at the picture, then out the window. "Not yet." Later that week, they stood at the city's old amphitheater, now rebuilt, reclaimed, renewed. Ilana took the stage, bandages gone, smile warm. This city was drowning in silence, but today we raise our voices. The passage is now official, funded, protected, here to stay. Applause erupted. Rena and Rose held hands in the front row. Shaq stepped up to the mic. "I've been called a lot of things in my life. Athlete, entertainer, giant," he paused. "But today I'm just a man who saw pain, and chose not to look away. The crowd went silent. I was once told the system can't be fixed. But we're not here to fix the system. We're here to build something new. He looked out at the sea of young faces. And we're just getting started. The sun was beginning to set over the city, the kind of golden sky that made every rooftop glow, like it was dipped in hope. Shaq stood alone on the roof of the Passage building, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the skyline that had once felt so broken. Below him, music and laughter floated up from the community celebration happening in the courtyard. Kids were dancing. Families were eating together. And in every corner of that space, healing was happening. But Shaq wasn't celebrating just yet. He was remembering. He remembered the look on Rena's face the first night they found her, eyes hollow, too young to carry the weight she did. He remembered Rose curled up beside her, clinging to a teddy bear someone had left behind. He remembered Elena, trying to speak through cracked lips in pain, still managing to smile at her girls. He remembered every shattered moment. And he remembered the promise he made to himself. I'm not walking away this time. Coach Evans climbed the stairs slowly behind him, carrying 2 folding chairs and 2 sodas. You always come up here when things get real, Coach said, handing Shaq a drink. Shaq chuckled quietly. Rooftops give you perspective. Coach sat down beside him. So tell me, what do you see now? Shaq didn't answer right away. I see a city waking up, he said finally. Still groggy, still scarred, but alive. Back downstairs, a small makeshift stage had been set up under strings of warm lights. Alana stepped up to the mic, her voice stronger than ever. I want to thank every single person who believed in this place, who believed that pain doesn't get the final word. That hope does. Applause. I want to thank our heroes, even the ones who never wanted the spotlight. She looked up at the rooftop. Shaq raised his soda. Later that night, as the courtyard emptied out and families headed home, Shaq found himself alone in the Passage's main hallway. It was quiet. He walked past rooms now filled with beds, art supplies, bookshelves. One room had a chessboard set up. Another had glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling. He paused at the therapy room, where Rose and Rena were playing with finger puppets. Alana smiled at him through the window. They were okay. They were finally okay. Then came the letter. Coach handed it to Shaq in the office the next morning. It was sealed in old parchment, with a gold crest stamped on the back. Shaq raised an eyebrow. What is this? Coach grinned. A legacy. He opened it. Inside was a formal invitation from the city council. We would like to offer you a permanent seat on the Urban Renewal and Justice Reform Task Force. Your leadership has reshaped lives. We believe it can reshape policy. Shaq stared at the words. He was being asked to step into the system, to rebuild it from the inside. His chest felt tight, not with fear, but with gravity. He nodded slowly. I'm in. Months passed. The Passage expanded into 4 more neighborhoods. Local law enforcement began taking trauma-informed training classes developed by Alana and her team. Coach started a mentorship academy for boys ages 10 to 17. And Shaq? He became something the city had never seen before. Not just a protector, not just a leader, but a symbol of what happens when power meets compassion, when strength carries, not crushes, when a man known for his height learns to kneel beside the broken and lift them without glory. 1 year later, the mayor's office unveiled a new bronze statue at the edge of the East River. It was Shaq, standing tall, one hand on a child's shoulder, the other pointing forward toward the future. On the base, a plaque read, "He didn't just save us, he stayed with us." Back on the rooftop, Shaq sat with Rena and Rose between him, their little legs dangling over the ledge. The sun was setting again, just like it did that night. Rena leaned her head on his arm. "You're the biggest person I ever met," she said softly. Shaq smiled. "Outside, yeah, but inside. You and your sister are giants." Rose giggled. "You think we'll be tall like you someday?" Shaq looked at them, these once broken souls now shining like twin stars. "No," he said. "You'll be taller, not here." He tapped her head. "Here." He tapped her heart. And as the final rays of light danced over the city Shaq had helped heal, he knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the legacy they would leave together. One built not from victory, but from standing back up. Again and again and again.